On today's episode, we're going to be discussing this book. It's called Sea Change, Unlikely Allies, and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions. It's all about catch fisheries. If you want to know more of what catch fishery is and what it actually will do to help preserve fisheries, help protect the ocean, you're going to want to watch this episode. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Today we're going to be talking about this book, Sea Change. It's great. I'm going to show it one more time here. It was sent to me. I get sent a lot of books, and I get emails from a lot of people. I'm very privileged to have that and to be able to get free books and to be able to read them. When I started to read this book, this was not what I expected. I expected something on conservation, so it'd be more like, this is what we need to do to protect the ocean. This is the frameworks and everything that we have to do. This is not this book. This book is a story. This book is a story about a fisher named Buddy, where we meet him at a very young age, where he's fishing with his father. And I don't want to give any kind of spoilers, but he grows up and he becomes a fisher, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on between that, which I highly recommend that you read this book to find out. But you see his journey as not only becoming a man and an adult, but becoming a fisher and the evolution of becoming a fisher to eventually becoming an advocate to protect the ocean and protect fisheries and become like a conservation hero. This is something that is important to know, not only for me as a scientist and as a conservationist, but also somebody, if you're listening in this audience and you may not be involved in this field. I know I have a lot of people who are, but I have a lot of people in this audience who aren't. We always hear bad things about fishers. We always why are we hearing that? This is a book that gives you the perspective of a fisher. Sometimes you may not like what the person has to say, but other times you might just be like, yeah, you know what? This is actually pretty cool. This is something I want to know about, and I want to know more fishers like this. And there are a lot of fishers that are just like that. And so it's really important that we get to meet them, we get to hear their story. And this is one of those stories. This is a true story, and it's something that I feel is very important. And Amanda is on the podcast to discuss it. She was one of the co-authors. James Workman was her other author, who's the journalist and who wrote most of the book, but Amanda provided a lot of the information and worked it with him. She is the executive director of the Environmental Defense Fund, a huge organization that does a lot of work. And it was a pleasure to be able to speak to her and get her perspective on this. Not only did we talk about the book, but for the most part, we talked about how she became an executive director, because I was curious, but also talking about what environmental defense does and what type of programs they have, but very much focusing on the ocean fisheries program and how they partner with unlikely heroes, unlikely people that you don't see being partnered with and having those discussions early on with. And I think that's really important. And we're starting to see that. And then if you've been listening to the podcast anytime recently, there's been a focus on building trust, building relationships with local communities, with fishers, with stakeholders, and bringing in conservation right at the beginning so that everybody's perspective is being heard. That's really important when we have that type of participation, when we talk about conservation in a local area or even in a larger region or even a national, like in a country or even internationally. So it's very important to have these conversations and to know their perspective. So without further ado, here is the Executive Director of the Environmental Defense Fund, Amanda Leland, discussing with us this book, Sea Change, Unlikely Heroes, and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions. This is something that everybody needs to read, in my opinion. It's on sale as of this recording, and you can pick it up very quickly. I think you can even pre-order it if it's not on sale, if you're catching this at a different time. But something to really listen to. So here's Amanda. Enjoy the interview, and I'll talk to you after. Hey, Amanda. Welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about the book Sea Change and Catch Shares?
I am more than ready. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Oh, I am so excited. Now, I get emails quite a bit for people to come on the show. And it was so great to see someone from EDF, from Environmental Defense Fund, to say, hey, you know what? We have somebody for you. She just co-wrote a book. It's about sea change. We'd love to send it to you so you could read it. And I'm like, I'm in. I do get a lot, I do get some books to be, that come to me and I peruse them and stuff. But I have to admit, Amanda, when I started reading this, I didn't know what to expect. I started reading this and I'm like, this is really fun. I'm into this. This is a bit like a novel in a way, but it's true. This is like a true story. And it was very cool. I haven't finished the book, just full disclosure. I haven't finished the book yet, but I am excited to talk not only about the book, but the contents of the book. I don't want to give away anything, but I want, and I don't want spoilers because I want people to read the book. But what I want to do is dive into catch shares and why they're such an important tool and why you wanted to write about them. You you and James want to write about them, James Workman. And so we're going to get into all that. But before we do, I want the audience to get to know who you are. Amanda, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Thank you. Yeah, well, again, it's exciting to be here. So my name is Amanda Leland, and I'm Executive Director of Environmental Defense Fund, which means that I run the organization. And EDF is a longstanding international environmental organization. We have offices around the world, and we really think about and work towards finding the ways that work for people in the planet. So
Mm,
we have a lot of unlikely partnerships. One of the things we're going to talk about that comes through in the Sea Change book. It's finding common ground and working towards solutions together, even with people who you think you might have less in common with.
right.
And really, because fundamentally, we actually generally share the same needs and the same
Mhm.
goals. And we might not start there, but we can find those paths, and Sea Change is about finding one of those paths for ensuring that we have a healthy and productive ocean.
Awesome. Now, being an executive director of an organization like Environmental Defense Fund, that's a big deal. Like that is like when somebody said like, hey, the executive director of Environmental Defense Fund wants to come on the podcast, I was like, whoa. I told my wife, I was like, this is big news. Like this is awesome. Like it's always great to talk to people from your staff because they're always great and they're always so passionate and everything like that. But an
Yeah.
executive director, I'm like, this is a big deal. When you started out in this line of work, like when you started your education path and things like that, did you expect this is where you were going to end up as an executive director? Like, was that the plan? You want to be in charge of an organization?
I've never really, this is the sad truth about me. I've never really been a person who's tried for a certain title or a certain job. I'm driven 100% by getting things done and
Love it.
making the world a better place to the extent that I can.
Mm-hmm.
I have been a lifelong fan. I actually became an EDF member when I was 13 in the seventh grade.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I have a long story with EDF that predates any jobs whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I never really thought, in high school, college, that this would be the kind of work I would do. I was
Right.
tracked into science. I was a marine scientist. That's sort of the beginnings
Mm-hmm.
of a career as working in marine advocacy and conservation. But yeah, it's been a long journey, and again, not really motivated by the title. I'm happy to have it. It's a real
Of
honor.
course. Yeah.
But what I love about EDF there, is we have this incredible platform to solve the biggest problems facing people in the planet. And
Mm-hmm.
we have an incredibly smart and talented staff. We have really strong and generous supporters who've been with us on some really tough journeys. And they stay with us. And we have these incredible partnerships. And again, working with fishermen, when we started that work 15, 20 years ago, it was nobody like it was not the way conservation was done.
Mm-hmm.
And there's stories like that in EDF's work over and over again of how we find these unlikely partnerships becoming allies and changing the world.
Yeah. I'm going back to you being 13, being part of, joining EDF. What does that look like as a 13-year-old joining an organization like that? Like what was your role? Was it like a volunteer role? Was it just you got newsletters? What does that look like? Because there's a lot of people. My kids are teenagers. They're 16 and
Yeah.
turning 18. And I tell them like, how do you feel like connected to the planet, connected to, the ocean, or just connected to wildlife? And I've always thought like there are programs out there that were, uh, kids can join, but as a 13-year-old, what does that look like, and why EDF when you joined?
So I'm really big into evidence and progress and experience. And in the seventh grade, I did a science fair project. I
Mm-hmm.
became very excited about the potential for recycling. Now, this was a long time ago. I
Yeah.
might be older than you think. This was a long time ago. This is when, like in the U.S., the nightly news, there was
Yeah.
like the garbage ships that nobody could figure out where they would go, and there was this plucky EDF scientist who was always on the news talking about the fact that we needed to do more recycling to deal with all this
Hmm.
trash. And um and I just thought he was the best. Like he was so
Hey,
inspiring to
it
me.
was a great idea at the time, right?
So I mean that tells you what kind of person I am. I got really excited about one of
Yeah.
our nerdy scientists who was standing on a big pile of trash. And that's what got me going. So I actually did my research of all the organizations who were focused on recycling because I got so into it. EDF
That's
was doing the
awesome.
most by far at the time, and I sent my $30 in to become a
Yeah.
member.
Yeah.
And I got all the cool swag, or now it's the merch.
Yes.
And I wore it around with pride, and I showed off to everybody that I was like a member of this incredibly impactful organization. And and that stuck with me for years. It sort of waxed and waned a little depending on
Yeah.
what my interests were, but
Yeah.
it was with me the whole time. And it turns out that that really plucky scientist had an office two doors down from mine when I started at EDF
No.
21 years ago. And he retired a couple years ago, and I was able to be at his retirement party. Yeah.
Did you tell him like he's
Oh
the
yeah,
reason
he
why
knows.
you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he definitely knows.
That's awesome. Now, like
Yeah.
as a 13-year-old, there are a lot of 13-year-olds who are not necessarily focused on this. Like, were your friends involved as well? Like, were you able to rope in
No.
your friends, or they're just kind of looking at you like, oh, there goes Amanda and her recycling?
Yeah, definitely no friends. I think, I don't know. I was maybe a little out of step with what was going on around me. I don't know. But it over time, I definitely attracted people into thinking about and becoming part of the environmental movement. So while I wasn't so good at that in the seventh grade,
Right.
it definitely became part of who I am, and how people think about me, and who I associate myself with,
Hmm.
not just other environmentalists, but people who fundamentally care about um, ensuring that their kids have more opportunities and a cleaner, healthier planet to live on
Okay.
than we do today. That kind of like legacy and generational aspect is really important to me. And it was the generational aspect that got me really excited about the oceans. It was my grandfather who taught me how to fish and to captain a boat when I was 7.
Wow.
My passion for the ocean started really early. I was out there fishing bluefish with him
Yeah.
when nobody
Love it.
else was fishing bluefish
Right.
at the time. So anyway, I guess those early beginnings are important, and that has shaped my life and my career. And I think it matters to other people too.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, working at EDF, I assume it's one of the places you've worked the longest out of your
Yes.
career. Um, as you started to work there, did you just start to sort of climb the nonprofit ladder, and what interested you in growing in that way? Because you were a marine scientist, and
Yeah.
you said that there's a lot of great like a lot of great scientists in general that work at EDF, and you can do a lot of great things in different positions there. But as you get, a lot of scientists don't like, as they grow into an organization or a government department, you get more administrative roles, and you get away from doing the actual science. And each role is important to when you do it, but some people don't like that. What what attracted you to continue to grow within the organization into a position like this?
So that story for me starts actually before I joined EDF, because I didn't come in as a marine scientist. So
Ah,
my
okay.
shift from science into conservation happened before that. I was actually in grad school, and I was working as a scientist in the Gulf of Maine
Mm-hmm.
with sea urchin fishermen, and I was confronted in a fishery that was largely collapsed or
Mm-hmm.
collapsing. in the coast of Maine. And the fishermen would say to me, if I don't take the last urchin, someone else will.
It's a common
And
thing we hear, right? Yeah.
right. And I was in my early 20s and I was like just the ridiculousness and the pain in that kind of a statement. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody should have to eat their seed corn in order to feed their
Yep.
family today, right? That
Right.
is there's no way that that's going to work. And so at the time in that period, fisheries were collapsing all around the country. And I was sort of in this mind frame of I don't want to be the scientist that writes the epitaph for these productive fisheries and the health of
Mm-hmm.
the oceans. I want to be on the side of solutions. So
Yep.
that brought me to take a fellowship in Washington, D.C., where I worked for a member of Congress and I learned more about policy. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, I came to EDF as sort of a marine advocate, ocean advocate with an understanding of both science and policy.
Gotcha.
So that's how I came into EDF. And then over time, I've had 9 different jobs here.
That's
Um,
unreal.
so yeah, so I like, I guess the ocean analogy here is hook, line, and sinker. I don't know. Like I kind of feel like I've done all the things one can do at EDF. And in different ways. And still, every day, my job is different. Even 21 years
Yeah.
on as executive director, every day it's different.
It provides a cool challenge, because you never know what to expect. Just like the ocean, you never know what is going to spit at you or what's going to reveal for you at that time. That's a really
Right.
interesting. You mentioned at the beginning. You mentioned at the beginning of this episode that you've been motivated by like trying to accomplish things. How has that evolved over your career? Like you mentioned, you went from science to advocacy and like policy. Now, you're more into a leadership role, driving a lot of great scientists and advocates. How has that evolved over your career so far?
I well, I guess I'm, in the category of not trying, I've never really set out to have a certain job title or to do a certain thing. I'm, I care a lot about getting things done. I care a lot about making the most of what we have. Um, and and I'm also a person who learns by doing. And so I think that that has enabled me to take on more and do different parts of this kind of a job in different ways over time um, without having the always the formal training. Like I went to school to be a marine scientist. I did not go to school to be a nonprofit executive. Um, and somehow I seem to be doing that. So I just actually talked to a young person yesterday who's in her final year of college looking for advice, career advice. And I said, try everything. Like you
Mm,
never know what's going to stick and feel right to you. So when you're presented with an opportunity, even if it feels like it's not the logical progression, go ahead and try it because it may end up being really helpful to you in the end. And I think that that's largely how I've progressed and how I've gotten to where I am. And again, I never thought as a 13-year-old, $30 a year member of EDF that I'd become executive director. Never thought that.
yeah, I often wonder too, like going from those types of positions to an executive director, like how did you gain the skills and what skills do you think really prepared you for a role like this?
Um, I think uh, what you need in a role like this is an ability to communicate uh, in a way that people can understand you. So I think communication is often overlooked and potentially one of the most important keys to success. I think being able to distill complexity down into simplicity is part of that. Um, and I think recognizing that humans are humans and we're all in the shared same place and we are often motivated by similar things and working to find common cause and not try to create more distinctions and more polarity. I think actually finding ways to work together is incredibly important. Um, and being true to yourself and to the facts and making, in my view, sort of like a lot of people ask about risk taking, what is my risk tolerance in this kind of a job? And I have a pretty high tolerance for risk if I also am focused on what the information that's available is telling me about the situation or the need for where EDF can be the most effective and where there's a need for our kind of engagement. So being able to think sort of at the broad scale and then bringing it down to how can we add value and what is our special offering to the world? Because there's a lot of really great, impressive conservation and environmental groups out there.
Yeah.
EDF, yeah, EDF is one of many, right? And so recognizing what we're good at and where we can make a difference is important um, and really our legacy and our offering to the world.
Wonderful. Speaking of EDF, now I've probably gone in a little too much into your career, but I was curious. So, and it's my show, so I like to talk about this kind of stuff,
You
and
get
I
to
like
call
people
the
to.
shots.
Yeah, I get to call the shots. But I think what's interesting is EDF is such a great organization. But for those who are not familiar with the type of work that you do, can you kind of like summarize and even maybe name off a couple of examples of some of the programs that you have working and some of the work that you've done?
Yeah, so EDF is an organization that sort of takes the big swings at the toughest environmental problems. We bring a pretty broad toolkit to solving those problems. So we have legal capacity, we have scientific capacity, economic capacity, and we work really closely with business and communities. So kind of like up and down the whole chain, all the way to the top, businesses in the world to very discrete communities where there's solutions to be advanced and demonstrated that can serve as a beacon for others. We do focus on models that are replicable. We like to engage where we think we can drive impact at scale. So that means like demonstrating a solution can work and then
Hmm.
trying to bring it to the whole sector. And that's important. So some of those, and that goes back to that sort of that premise that I said at the front of like finding the ways that work. We are not dogmatic in the solution. We are looking for what's going to work and make the biggest difference in a way that's going to work for people and their wallets. Like
Hmm.
the fundamental affordability proposition of environmental solutions is important in this context. So some of the big areas where we focus, where you might see us, a little bit more prominently in the public space, in particular, is around reducing methane emissions.
Hmm.
So methane, a lot of people might not know, methane is a really it's a greenhouse gas, so it's a climate pollutant that is driving much of the warming we're experiencing right now. It has a relatively short life in the atmosphere, but it's very, very powerful.
Hmm.
And so reducing those emissions is really the best way to pull the emergency brake on the climate change that we're experiencing today. And much of those emissions come from the oil and gas sector. And so we work to reduce point source emissions. So, like leaking infrastructure, it could be a pipeline, it could be a gas line, it could be an oil and gas development field. The reducing those emissions right now is what can help us right now in addressing climate change. So we have for many years been working to solve that problem with making some progress,
Yeah.
for sure, for some progress. Another area where we're very focused is protecting tropical forests. So the second area the world can make immediate gains on climate change right now is ensuring the protection of tropical forests and reducing forest burning, either through trying to clear land to do something else, or for gold mining, which is an
Hmm.
increasingly big part of the equation, or wildfire. So if you're,
We're up in Canada and we are in
yes,
trouble. Yeah.
you are like Canada, the fire seasons in Canada are just off the charts. I was
Off the
just in
charts.
Maine for the last 2 weeks and there was no clear air there.
Yeah.
And that is unheard of for Maine, which typically is outside of those, that
Yeah.
wind pattern.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
and
people
just to
all
add to
over,
like the
yeah.
severity of it, I live just outside of Toronto, where typically we get the smoke, but we don't get the fire. But we're under fire bans. Even
Oh,
in
you
our
are.
backyards. Yeah, they've just announced
Yeah.
it this week because we've barely had rain. I think the first rainfall we had was last night. I don't even know how long it was. I was asleep, but it wasn't long enough. I'll tell you. Like we just haven't had any rain, so it's a very scary situation. So definitely understand where that problem is coming from and how hard it is to tackle.
It is um emerging as
Hmm.
like the biggest one of the biggest challenges to solve at this point because it affects all of us. It affects nature. It upends lives in a minute. And it is also driving vast emissions that nobody really has been thinking about yet, right? Like the potential for wildfire to swamp some of the gains we're making on addressing climate change is high. So anyway, so forest protection and forest management
Hmm.
are critically important and an area where EDF is also focused. And then, of course, there's our work on fisheries and oceans, which I led for many years and now work with others
Yeah.
who are ably leading that work at EDF with our partners.
That's amazing. I mean, those are big programs, big issues to tackle. And you need some very intelligent, some very motivated and passionate people to be able to do that. And definitely, there's no shortage of that at EDF. Let's focus in. Obviously, there's a lot we can focus in on, but let's focus in obviously on the fisheries and oceans side of it. Fisheries is a huge problem around the world. Overfishing is a huge problem. There's a lot
Yeah.
of different areas even within that that we can go into. But a lot of the times we really focus in on the amount that's being taken out of the ocean, which is obviously is overfishing. But we look at it from a conservation perspective. How do we protect this stock? How do we protect this species? How do we make sure that it's going to be around so that people can fish for years and years and years? But really, when we talk about fisheries, and I talk to a lot of people who are not necessarily familiar with the ocean issues and fisheries in particular, they just want to conserve. They want to protect. And so when in this type of scenario, often vilified are the fishing communities, right? And the fishermen and fisherwomen who are out there, and the fishing people who are out there, day in and day out in dangerous areas, in dangerous conditions, trying to catch stuff. And many of them are trying to just catch to feed their families to make sure their communities are fine. And when a stock collapse, and I use on my podcast a lot with the cod fishery collapse here in Canada and in the Northwest Atlantic back in the 1990s, which still hasn't technically recovered. It was devastating for those communities that were dependent on those cod stocks. Trying to prevent the overfishing, trying to ensure that fisheries are conserved, but also trying to protect the well-being and the sustainability of fishing communities to be able to fish forever is a complex issue. And you mentioned earlier that you often partner with fishers and fishing communities and so forth, like the quote unquote unlikely allies, in this type of game. Um, let's just talk about, like, why do you think they're vilified, and why does Environmental Defense Fund use this approach to get better, to get the results that they do?
Well, I mean, I think it's hard to say why they're vilified. I think fundamentally that happens when regulations are established um, that basically put fishermen into a box and they
Mm-hmm.
have very few choices for themselves. And by that, I mean a regulation that says the fishery can only catch so much this year, which means that every fisherman is racing and to go out to catch as much as they can as fast as they can, because when that limit is reached, they shut the fishery down. And that's how fisheries in the US and Canada were managed for decades. And other parts of the world too, right? It's this like it creates this race, and then the fishermen are, in order to be able to do their job and bring home money for their family and feed their families, they're basically pushed to this ultra competitive mindset
Hmm.
where it's like, I just have to get as much as I can as fast as I can. And then you have organizations in my sphere, the environmental organizations, saying like, but it's sticking to the science is the most important thing. And I don't think, and so I think it just creates this false dynamic that you have to be fighting between these two things, when fundamentally the fishermen and the fishing communities don't want to be in the situation that I talked about with those urchin fishermen of, if I don't take the last one, somebody else will. Like, nobody actually wants to be there.
Right.
And there are other ways to do this so you don't, so that they're not there. And so my focus and our focus has been on trying to find those other ways rather than trying to put the blame on the fishermen.
Hmm.
And I think the other thing about this is, around the world there are 3 billion people. I think we forget this
Yeah.
in North
Yes.
America. We forget
For
this point a
sure.
lot. There are
Yeah.
3 billion people who rely on seafood as their primary source of protein. And they're typically the most vulnerable people on the planet. They don't have a lot of other options. There's not like an easy pasture for them to put a cow out into to have an alternative. And this is where they get their nutrition. And so the idea that people are just going to not fish also undermines in my view, the reality of like, people need to eat, then kids need nutrition for their brains to grow. And and that's going to happen whether you tell them
Hmm.
it's protected or it's not protected. And so the path forward for, I think, is about management that rewards conservation for fishermen, where they financially and community wise benefit by conservation. And then you get a better marriage between areas that are fished and areas that aren't fished, because the fishermen are more likely to defend those areas that aren't fished if they know that they're going to be able to catch a certain amount or whatever, have that
Hmm.
direct access and that feedback loop over time. That may have been a long-winded answer to your question.
It was a complex question, so it needed a long-winded answer. I loved it. I completely agree with you, and it's something that I hear, all the time. I've been on boats as a marine scientist myself. I've been on boats with local fishermen who are just they know the lay of the water and the land. They've been there for they have generational knowledge on how this fishery has behaved and the trends of the fish, more than scientists a lot of the times. And so it's imperative that we continue to work together, not only as scientists but as advocates, as conservationists, and as a team, to be able to, like, how do we get through this together? And I completely agree that I feel like people in North America often forget. You hear a lot of people like, well, we just have to stop eating seafood, and it's just that won't, like, in reality, that won't happen in a lot of places, because they, like you mentioned, there's 3 billion people that depend on seafood as their main protein source, and it's a nutritious source, and it goes to a lot for child development and everything like that, and that's an important aspect to how we move forward. And so working with them and not vilifying them, I think, is a much better way. It's not always easy, because some of these issues are complex, and they do want to be able to feed themselves as well as feed their community, and be able to just live, right, and be able to be happy as a family. Now, there are parts of, as we get more into this catch, share, and the book, there are parts to fishing that are very different. I think a lot of times everything gets lumped up into fishing. And so, in a lot of documentaries, such as like Ocean by David Attenborough that just came out, they talk a lot about the industrial fishing, where it's like fishing for the maximum, processing at sea, for a length of time, just trying to get as much as possible. But often forgotten are the artisanal and local fishers, the indigenous fishers, the local Canadian and American and European fishers who are just trying to catch a certain amount of fish so that they can sell it and feed their families, maybe keep some for themselves and move on. There's that divide. How, like, from a perspective for EDF, how do you approach those two types of fishing? And am I missing something in between of those two sort of categories of fishing? Like, is there certain things, like, is EDF focused on the local fisher, or are they focused also on some of the larger, more industrial type of fishing, or is it a little bit of both?
I'd say it's in all of the above.
Yeah.
I think for sure. What the character there are some I think there's some misunderstandings about some aspects of industrialized fishing.
Mm.
So if you look into the Alaska slash British Columbia fisheries in the US and Canada, you'll see pretty industrialized, actually quite industrialized fisheries.
Yeah.
Some of them have very deep connections into native communities.
Mm-hmm.
So this I like it is very much tied to local community and local culture. And they fish cleaner and
Hmm.
with maximum fish recovery. So they use every part of the fish and
Gotcha.
they don't throw anything over. So they're basically utilizing everything. And so if you look at the pollock fishery, which is the biggest fishery in the United States,
Yep.
it's one of the best managed fisheries in the world.
Wow.
And that isn't what people think about when they think of industrialized fishing. And it is what provides a lot of the fast food restaurants with fresh fish.
Mm-hmm.
And I will happily go to McDonald's and get a fillet of fish
Yeah,
sandwich
because it's well
because I
managed.
know I know where that those fish are coming from, and I know that that's a well managed fishery. So that doesn't mean every industrialized fishery in the world or every boat in the world, is operating at the same level. And in fact, probably that's not the case because it sets a very high standard. But it isn't quite the distinction of industrialized versus artisanal. And then on the other side, you've got, or in the middle is probably the boats in the Gulf of Mexico, which are commercial fishermen working on boats, but they go out overnight, a week at a time. They're not big, uh, big and boats like you would see in Pollock, where um, they're processing on board, but they're commercial fishermen doing their job. And then there's if you could go even smaller to in Belize, coastal Belize, where they're out in a small little, even some would say skiff. Some of
Right.
them have only in the last couple decades moved from a sail to a little outboard engine. Um, Often these fishermen have more in common with each other than you would
Hmm.
expect because they view them. I don't want to characterize them for them, but what I've taken away from getting to know fishermen in different types or segments of the sector is that they care a lot about ensuring the long-term longevity of their industry, and
Right.
and and they have this really important, you said sort of generational knowledge, which I think is right. Like their ability to see into an ocean that is otherwise invisible to everybody else is amazing. They
Yeah.
see things and they feel things and they can interpret things in ways that even us scientists struggle with sometimes. So
Right.
it is true that there are different types of fisheries and they certainly have different needs and qualities, but I think there's more in common than a
Yeah.
lot of people often talk about.
Okay, well that's good to know. You get something, you learn something every day because I don't get to interact with a lot of these different styles of fishermen and the way they use things. So obviously, as technology increases, it's supposed to be more efficient and sometimes even better for the fishery. So it's good. It's good to know that, and it's good to have that differentiation or even understand some of the similarities and differences throughout that. Now, working with fishers and understanding a lot of the different ways that once they catch fish, what happens to that fish afterwards. Oftentimes I remember reading, I forget where I read this, but I remember reading where fishermen in North Carolina would catch their seafood, whether it be shrimp or whether it be fish of certain types, and they would, once they unloaded off the dock, it would go into a truck and it would go off to somewhere in northeastern U.S. and it would go maybe to a New York fishmonger or a restaurant or something like that. But they wouldn't know if you asked the fishers where it would go, they didn't necessarily know where it went. And in that area in North Carolina, they actually started to add, basically like a catch share kind of thing where people can put money in and they would have an idea of like what they could get, and they would get some of the fish. So they would know that the seafood would stay local, and the fishers would know who's eating the seafood, and you would know who caught your seafood. And it was really a nice community thing, and it was profitable for both sides. You get the community got affordable fish and seafood, and then the fishers were able to get money for that seafood and see where their seafood goes. It's a really interesting idea, bringing it back to the local and less like let's ship it off, not know where everything goes, but still make our money. But a lot of people in the middle make the money. The middle people, as they say, make the money, and then it kind of grows and grows and gets more expensive and gets more expensive. Why are catch shares such an interesting solution and a growing solution in a lot of communities, not only in the U.S., but all over the world? Why is that becoming more? It's almost like going back to the local. You know what I mean? It's like when to make an analogy, it's like in our lives we rush everywhere, and a lot of times when people say if you want to be more conservation focused, it's better to kind of slow your life down. Dr. Wallace J. Nichols used to talk about the slow coast and slowing your life down and enjoying nature a little bit more. I feel like this is kind of like the same thing. Is bringing it back local and hope that and you get the benefits of that. So why is this such an important tool in conservation for fisheries?
I think I like your point. I think often we talk about how the people closest to the problem are often the best to come up with the solution.
Right.
Like what am I'm sitting here in this room. What do I know, right? Like
Yeah.
it's actually the people who are living and experiencing the problem that are going to be the most likely to have a durable strategy for how to fix it. Um, and I think what catchers I think catchers is part like one way for that to happen. So if you think about um it, enabling fishermen to have some agency basically over their future. This is fundamentally what it is because you're by providing them certainty that they can catch so much in a year, which is
Hmm.
what the share is. It's like this certainty of how much they can catch. They can figure out how to catch it and maximize their profits on the other end. So they could time their catch to when the market conditions are going to be better. They may get more price per pound at a certain
Right.
time, right? Then they if they were all out at the same time and coming back to the dock with the same at the same time, which creates a market glut, and then they get
Mm.
low prices. And so to your point, like slowing it down actually gives the fishermen more agency, decision making agency about their own job and their own economic, potential. They can also do value added enhancements.
Hmm.
So you can think about do you want to do you want to change the type of fishing gear you're using to be able to market to a more higher end crowd, right? Like you can do that
Hmm.
by having certainty. You can fundamentally shift your practice of fishing, which typically is going to mean less waste, better quality product, higher price per pound, and more ability then to negotiate with whomever is buying your fish from you. And you see then forward contracting starting. You can plan out not just this fishing year, but future fishing years, because you know that as long as you don't violate the rules or go over your limit, you know that next year you're still going to have that percentage share and you can fish more next year. And that driver actually at a fleet level, when you think about all the boats in one fishery that have some version of shares, everybody then is incentivized to actually underfish the limit that year
Hmm.
because they can fish more next year because
Right.
it's a percentage share. So that's how you see the fishery rebuild so quickly
Yeah.
and the fishermen earning a higher profit almost immediately. So it really is this like win-win solution. Now it's not perfect, right? It doesn't
Of
solve
course.
every problem in the world,
Yeah.
or even in the fishery, but it definitely creates that path by which fishermen do better and the fish populations rebound. And that's why I think it's spreading around the world, because people are seeing that it creates a virtuous cycle rather than a perverse one that draws everything down.
Wonderful. I love that explanation. Here's a question for you. When we talk, there's a lot of different tools in the conservation tool belt, especially around fisheries. Marine protected areas is one of them. And a lot of times when marine protected areas are suggested, there's a lull in the ability to catch, right? Like there might be in that area you can't catch for a certain amount of time, or you may not be able to catch for a while until the fishery starts to recuperate, because it could be in that state, where it needs to be. When you implement a catch share, you're taking a percentage of, everybody gets a percentage, but like you said, a lot of times under the percentage, or maybe even under what the quota it was initially, because you can fish more. Is there a delay in fishing? So when a catch share is put in, do fishers have to wait a bit and then they're able to fish, like wait a season or what have you, until that fish population recoups a little bit more? Or can they still fish, just they may not be able to fish as much that year compared to the next and the next beyond?
I don't know of a case, there may be some that exist. I don't know of a case in which a fishery was entirely closed from day one of a new catch share program being put
Okay.
into place. I mean, that's a
Gotcha.
fundamentally a science question of like how much fishing should be permittable based on,
Right.
how much fish are out there. So that's really a science question. What we have seen, so in an extreme case that EDF was very much part of, so I can speak to this. Um, the west coast of the United States, the groundfish fishery, which is the same complex of species that are in the British Columbia groundfish fishery, was in a state of collapse. It was declared a federal disaster. And it's a complex of dozens of different species, often very difficult to even determine what their difference is. Like it's very hard to speciate them, even when you get them on board. They all look the same and they're super long lived. So you've got very long-lived species, which which should mean it takes a long time to recover, right? Like the recovery trajectory would be very long because it takes a long time for them to get to maturity where they're going to produce more fish. And when the West Coast groundfish fishery catch share was implemented, there were some of these stocks, some species that were so overfished that they basically had a zero catch limit. Some
Hmm.
version, it wasn't quite zero, but it was
Yeah.
just shy of zero.
Right.
And these are fish that if they all school together. So if you catch one, you're going to catch a whole boatload of them. And if you catch a boatload of them, the entire fleet gets shut down because you've exceeded the limit, and the person who caught it is probably going to be out of their quota.
Right.
So what the fishermen did was they worked together to create what was called a risk pool. So they pooled their quota of these super overfished species with the recognition that if one person gets hit, everybody's going to suffer. So we want to be able to spread that around. And at the same time then, well, around the same time, they worked collectively to figure out where those super depleted species were most likely to be, and they created these marine protected areas that they all stayed out of.
Hmm.
And so in doing so, They never actually hit one of those, what was called a disaster tow. And these super long lived, super rare fish rebounded very quickly
Hmm.
because it was the incentives were set up so that they would protect them.
Unreal. This is such a cool
And
thing.
yeah,
Like it's such a cool tool to use, and it brings it back, like I said, locally, and I just love that. But it's also a tool that not a lot of people who are not necessarily involved in fisheries, or like just like sort of the average person, who's running around and eating seafood like they want, and trying to just survive life as we live, and stuff, but are not super involved in fisheries. They don't really know about catch shares. And so there's ways to communicate it, and one way that I love to make it really entertaining is the way you did it with your co-writer James Workman, was this book here, Sea Change. I'm going to put it up here on the video, so if people are watching on YouTube to take a look at it. And I really love the approach that you both took on this. It's called Sea Change: Unlikely Allies and a Success Story of Oceanic Proportions, which I love. But it was all about catch shares. But there was a story behind it, and it followed this fisher, Buddy, and he, in his entire life, from childhood all the way to Mr. Fish, who's trying to fish, and even in the book, I don't want to give too much away, but even in the book, he says, the words say, like, if somebody's going to catch the last one if I don't. Someone's going to be there. I see that in the book, and he's just sort of like what we would typify as a fisher, without stereotyping, but following a real story and understanding how the evolution came to be, and joining in on this catch share. Why the book? And is this like a project from Environmental Defense Fund? Is this something that's personal? And like, why did you decide to go the book route? It's a lot of questions all at once, so I apologize.
well, the book. So I think that in a world of 1 minute increments of news, we sometimes forget about what has actually happened in the world.
It's true.
So
So
like
true.
a little bit, this is like taking a minute and thinking, what, and recalling something really incredibly powerful that happened that made almost no news, right? Which was and the book is about the recovery of US fisheries, but then it
Mm-hmm.
spreads out to how this fisherman Buddy doesn't become just the chief, like a chief advocate of sustainable fisheries in the US. He then travels around the world and brings his story to others as well. And so I think it's really, I think the intentionality around the book was capturing the breadth of the story, the humanness of the story of Buddy, as the protagonist, and the cast of many other fishermen who are involved in that story along the way in some way, and um and celebrating it. A little bit of my purpose here is like, let's celebrate something really great that has
Yeah.
happened. And we spend too much time talking about collapse and degradation and the future is going to be worse. And it isn't always the case. And I think
Yeah.
we don't do enough to talk about progress. And environmentalists are like typified to be the shooting for perfection.
Mm-hmm.
We're always shooting for perfection, and that drives people nuts. And I get
Mm-hmm.
it. And actually, this is about something that's really good and really durable. And
Yeah.
that's to me like that's what we should be aiming for. So a little bit trying to set up that environmental progress can happen.
Yeah.
Um, and and there's something to celebrate around that.
And what I love about this story is it spans almost like before,
Yeah.
fisheries policies came into play, to, we're at where we're at, over the last like 20 years in terms of, advocacy and understanding fisheries better. But the story of how the Magnuson-Stevenson Act came in, I did not know that story before. I knew of the policy and I knew how effective it was. I'm not going to say how it came in because I want people to read it. but I actually like stood up from my seat. I was at a cottage in front of water. Of course, that's where you want to read your book on water. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And my friends who were around me were like, what are you doing? I'm like, I did not know this. And I told them the story, and it was phenomenal. I did not realize that that's how this, fishing policy that has pretty much brought back a lot of fisheries around the U.S. was implemented. So I'm not going to say why and how, but read the book, and because it's important. I think it really gives you a history of how things have come through. It's not always perfect. It's not always necessarily for one reason or another, but there's always a reason why things come in, especially when you look at how it was done, who did it, and in a situation where we're in now, where it seems like a lot of people are against the environment from a policy perspective, how things can maybe come into play that would benefit the environment and real world situations as well. That's what it made me think about. But again, I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to give it away, but all this stuff, like, it's a rich history followed through the lens of someone who's gone through problems, with the family and then life. And then, it's just, he kind of goes all over the place, and then, but he has like a goal, and you're invested in Buddy throughout this whole time. And I just thought is really great. Now, have you always wanted, is this your first book, or have you written books before?
I have not written books. I have to give Jamie a lot of the credit here. So my co-author, who is an award-winning author, and
Right.
I am your typical nonprofit executive where if you can't say it to me in one page, like I'm not gonna like I can't. There's only so much I can absorb at once, right? So I am not. I will say admit that I am not the long form narrative
Right.
driver here. Jamie
Right.
very much is, and I'm very
Unreal.
grateful for him. The story was very much a partnership, so I don't want people to think that like he wrote it and my name's on it. It was very much a
Yeah.
partnership.
Yeah.
But he did really, I mean, he brought in a lot of those sort of prehistory elements, which I think really
Hmm.
make the story much more robust. And there's a depth there that, going all the way back to the first, the finding of the first fishing hook and the
Hmm.
in the colonial history of the United States. Like he was able to pull, I don't know if you've read those bits yet, but he was able to pull things into the story that um remarkably like create this movement in the story
Yeah.
that give Buddy and his life much more richness. I don't know if you've ever read Mark Kurlansky, but I read Cod, so he had Cod, Salt. I think he had a baseball book where he tells this history of the world around one item. And one of
Right.
them was about codfish in the United States and the colonial America and all and the Basques coming over, even long before that. Anyway, I he tells the story based on this one thing. And I feel like what we've done in this book is we've sort of Kurlansky-esqued it such that it's really about Buddy's life, but it's about how the world is changing based on somebody who's demonstrated real leadership
Yeah.
and is an unlikely hero. Like you
Yeah.
don't expect him to be a hero.
Not at all. Not at all. You don't expect it, but you're also not surprised because just the way his life has gone. You know what I mean? You're
Yeah,
like, yeah, that makes sense. But it kind
yeah,
of it goes to the evolution of fishers, throughout their lifetime and what they learn. And just like we have as scientists and advocates and executives and nonprofits go through the same kind of thing. There's definitely an education through life and life histories and things that happen, whether it's on an international level or whether it's on a level where we just don't understand. So I think it's wonderful. I really think it's great. I would love to get your perspective on cat shares. Like, what is the future of cat shares?
yeah. It's a really good question. I think it's a story that will in some ways sort of continue to write itself, meaning that there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this kind of
Mm,
management strategy works really well. And it works in a diversity of types of fisheries. You can do the kinds that we talked about that are operating here in the United
okay.
States that are percentage based, but there are others in Belize, for example, or in tropical coral reef ecosystems where they do it based on an area. So it's much more area based, but still certain fishermen who have access to certain areas and they defend them. They're called turfs. It's an adaptation of a catch share program. And fundamentally, it's a market-based and a rights-based strategy. So it invests people and it provides for that economic opportunity for them. And I think that around the world, we'll continue to see fisheries make the conversion. It takes time because you really need the fishermen and the communities to be part of the design process in order to get it right, for it to solve for the things that they need it to solve for. Different fisheries have different needs. What is new in the equation since the U.S. federal fisheries went through its big conversion, which is the story of what sea change lays out, is climate change. So with climate change and warming waters, we are now seeing a change in the distribution of fish away from the tropics because they're warming and towards the poles. And so fish are now crossing political boundaries that we have put on a map that they don't understand, in search of colder waters, because there are not fish, fish they have a pretty, sorry if you heard that computer noise. They have a pretty tight thermal tolerance. All marine species do. The oceans have been pretty stable for a long time. And so they're looking for cooler things now. And that's why we're going to see, even in some areas where you change the fisheries management, certain species may never come back. And that's the reality that we have to start thinking about. Like, I don't think we'll ever see the Gulf of Maine be a place where there's a lot of codfish in the future. Not because the management system is not working for cod. It's because their cod are cold water species, so they're moving north.
Because I think we got a good answer out of you.
Towards
Amanda, this has been wonderful. I really do appreciate that you coming on and spending your time. I know you're busy, and I do appreciate all the work that you do and all the work that you've put into this book, and Jamie as well. This book will be on sale when we post this recording, so I'll put the links into the show notes so people can get access. So it's Sea Change, Unlikely Allies, and a Success Story of Oceanographic Proportions. I highly recommend that you read this book. I am loving it so far, and I can't wait to finish it. And this is a story that I'm sure we'll hear a lot more of as we progress. So thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Amanda, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was so fun to be able to talk with you. It's very rare where I speak to executive directors, especially one who was a marine scientist before. There's a couple that I've done. It's been wonderful. It's just great to be able to hear their perspective and hear this story and why it's so important, why catch shares are becoming a bigger and bigger tool for conservation for fisheries, and also benefit both the fisher as well as their local communities, and maybe even a larger portion of that as well. If you want to buy the book, I'm going to put the link down below. But if you have any questions or comments, please let me know, because I'd be more than happy to answer those for you, or I'll pass it off to Amanda. She can help direct you to the answers that you have to know. So just put them in the comments below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or of course you can DM me at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram, just at How to Protect the Ocean. And if you really want to get to know more about the podcast, you can go to speakupforblue.com. There's a contact page. If you want to contact me, it goes to my personal email. Feel free to do that. And that's it for today's episode. I'm really pleased to be able to bring you this episode. I really am happy that you continue to support the podcast on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to your podcasts. It's been a continued pleasure. I'm not going anywhere. I just like to acknowledge that and be grateful. I am grateful for the fact that you continue to listen to this podcast. It makes me feel really good that you want to know more about the ocean. So thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.